Your heart rate is at 190 and climbing, and there's a shape moving through the brush 8 feet away that your brain has already labeled bear, death, and should have stayed in bed in that order. You don't move, you don't breathe. Every cell in your body is screaming the same instruction: freeze, and pray the shape doesn't notice you noticing it. The bushes part. It's a raccoon, a fat, unbothered raccoon mid-chew on something you don't want to identify, who looks at you with the enthusiasm of a DMV clerk and goes back to eating. And that, right there, that exact moment, is when my heart decided it had had enough of me. Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up here. Oh, hey there. Sorry, I get overly dramatic about my own death. Turns out, a genuine, top-shelf adrenaline dump followed immediately by, "Oh, it's nothing," is apparently a recognized cardiac risk. My cardiologist would have loved that fact. My cardiologist is not currently available to hear it because I outlived my cardiologist by about 11 years of being dead. Since then, I've had nothing but time, and time, it turns out, is the best seat in the house for watching how animals actually do the thing I failed to do in that split second: tell a real threat from a fake one. Because here's the secret nobody tells you. It is not instinct in the any scary shape equals run sense. That's what humans do. That's what killed me, functionally speaking. Animals do something far more sophisticated and far weirder, and I have watched it happen approximately 4,000 times now from a position that no biologist with a body has ever gotten to observe from. Let's get into it. Here's the thing. Evolution figured out a very long time before I did. Being afraid of everything is a losing strategy. If a rabbit sprints for its burrow every single time a leaf twitches, it burns calories it doesn't have, misses meals it needs, and eventually collapses from exhaustion in a spot a fox finds very convenient. Constant fear is not survival. Constant fear is a slow, inefficient form of suicide. So animals don't run a single alarm system with one setting, calm or screaming. They run something closer to airport security, multiple checkpoints, different thresholds for different threats, a whole triage process happening in fractions of a second, using senses you and I mostly ignore. I didn't have that software. I had raccoon equals bear equals cardiac event. Nature spent millions of years debugging this problem in literally every other species. Let's see how. Which brings us to something even stranger, the fact that some animals don't just detect threats, they narrate them. Vervet monkeys in East Africa have at least 3 distinct alarm calls, and this isn't guesswork. Researchers Robert Seyfarth and Dorothy Cheney recorded and played back these calls decades ago and got monkeys to react to a speaker the same way they'd react to the real thing. One call means leopard, and the monkeys scramble up into thin branches because a leopard can't follow them out there. A different call means eagle, and the monkeys duck down into thick cover because up in the branches is exactly where an eagle wants them. A third call means snake, and the monkeys stand up on their hind legs and scan the grass because snakes are ground-level problems that benefit from a good vantage point. Same species, same alarm, 3 completely different evacuation plans triggered by sound alone. This is not one general panic button. This is a vocabulary. And prairie dogs took this idea and frankly showed off. Research led by biologists Slobodchikoff found prairie dog alarm calls encode information about the predator's species, its size, its color, and even how fast it's moving. Different calls for a human in a blue shirt versus a human in a yellow shirt. Different calls for a fast-moving coyote versus a slow-moving one. This is a rodent doing real-time threat classification with more precision than most people's group chats during an actual emergency. Fast fact 1. Some researchers believe prairie dog calls may even carry information equivalent to "here comes that specific human again," essentially a rodent gossip network with facial recognition. We are talking about an animal smaller than a football issuing what is functionally a security bulletin. Meanwhile, I spent my one and only life unable to distinguish bear from trash panda. Evolution looked at this idea and somehow approved it, for the prairie dogs, not for me. Myth 1. True or false? Myth. Animals scream the same alarm for every danger, the way people scream at every spider regardless of size. Reality. False, and not by a small margin. Many species, vervets, prairie dogs, meerkats, even domestic chickens, use referential alarm calls, meaning the call itself contains information about what the threat actually is, not just that a threat exists. Why it's false? A general something's wrong signal wastes the listener's time and energy because they don't know whether to look up, look down, or run sideways. A specific signal lets every animal within earshot skip the guesswork and go straight to the correct response. It's the difference between a fire alarm and someone yelling kitchen, second floor, small, contained. One of those gets you moving in the right direction immediately. But before we get there, I need to tell you about the con artist, because not every voice you hear in the animal kingdom is telling the truth. Meet the fork-tailed drongo, a small, glossy black bird from southern Africa with the moral compass of a con man in a heist movie. Drongos hang around meerkat colonies and other species like pied babblers, and sometimes they do something genuinely useful. They spot a real hawk and give a real alarm call, and everyone dives for cover, drongo included. Good neighbor behavior.
But researcher Tom Flower documented something else entirely. Sometimes, when a meerkat catches a nice juicy bug or scorpion, the drongo will let out a fake alarm call, mimicking either its own alarm or, more deviously, the alarm call of the meerkat's own species, with no predator anywhere in sight. The meerkat panics, drops its food, and dives for a burrow. The drongo swoops down and eats the abandoned meal. This is theft by false alarm. This is a bird running a protection racket where the protection doesn't exist. Here's where it gets even better. Meerkats aren't infinitely gullible. If a drongo cries wolf too many times with the same call, the meerkats start ignoring it. The boy who cried wolf effect, except with actual measurable consequences on a bird's dinner plans. So what does the drongo do? It switches up its impression. It mimics a different species' alarm call, then another. Flower's research found drongos know upward of a dozen different alarm calls from other species, and they rotate through their repertoire specifically to stay one step ahead of the meerkats catching on. This is less clever bird and more a small feathered grifter running an elaborate long con on a colony of paranoid rodents. And honestly, I respect the hustle more than I respected most of my former coworkers. Which means meerkats are constantly doing something you and I rarely think about, deciding, on a call-by-call basis, whether to trust the messenger. You're a meerkat, you're mid-scorpion, venom glands wisely removed by rubbing the tail in dirt first, and a call goes up from a nearby drongo. Is it real? You have about half a second to decide whether that sound is a hawk overhead or a bird trying to rob you blind. Your decision depends on how many times this exact bird has lied to you recently, whether the call matches a predator call you actually know, and whether your own sentries, the meerkats literally assigned to lookout duty, are also reacting. You're not just listening to one signal, you're cross-referencing it against a mental ledger of who's been honest lately. That's not instinct, that's basically credit scoring with a scorpion at stake instead of a loan. What is actually going through its head? So what's happening inside a meerkat's brain in that moment? Scientists can't read minds, meerkat or otherwise. Trust me, I've tried. Being dead has not upgraded my telepathy. But behavioral evidence gives us a strong picture. This is a case where we can say it's known that meerkats respond less to repeated false alarms from the same caller, which suggests some form of associative memory. The animal isn't just reacting reflexively, it's weighing the call against past experience. It's likely, though harder to confirm experimentally, that this involves something like a running trust score attached to specific callers, not just specific call types. And it's hypothesized, more speculatively, that meerkats can partially generalize distrust, meaning if one drongo burns them enough times, they may become a little more skeptical of alarm calls in general for a while. The wildlife equivalent of, "I've been scammed twice this month, I'm hanging up on all robocalls now." Known, likely, hypothesized. 3 very different confidence levels, and good science keeps them separate. I did not do this while alive. I heard one sound in the bushes and skipped straight to hypothesized cardiac arrest. But before we get there, let's talk about a predator that prey animals have gotten scarily good at reading using nothing but body temperature. California ground squirrels share territory with northern Pacific rattlesnakes, which is, generously, a workplace hazard. But squirrels have developed something remarkable. They flag their tails at the snake, a visible, deliberate wave, and researcher Aaron Rundis found using thermal imaging that squirrels actually heat up their tail during this display, pumping extra blood into the tissue to raise its infrared signature. Why does that matter? Because rattlesnakes hunt partly using heat-sensing pit organs, especially effective against warm-blooded prey. A squirrel that heats its tail while flagging is sending a message specifically calibrated to a sense the snake actually uses. Garter snakes, which lack that heat-sensing ability, don't get the heated version. Squirrels flag their tails at garter snakes too, but skip the thermal boost, because it would be wasted effort. It's tailoring the warning to the receiver's actual sensory equipment, which is a level of targeted marketing most human advertisers would kill for. And the message itself seems to translate roughly to, "I see you, I know you're here, don't bother. The element of surprise is gone, so hunting me is now a bad investment of your energy." Fast fact 2. This is the same underlying logic as stotting, that stiff-legged, bouncing jump gazelles and springbok do right in front of a stalking predator, seemingly the worst possible move. It isn't recklessness. Research going back to biologist Tim Caro suggests stotting is an honest signal of fitness, a way of saying, "Look how much spare energy I have for pointless bouncing. You will not catch me, go bother someone slower." And predators, fascinatingly, often do exactly that, abandoning the stotting animal to target a different one nearby. Somewhere out there is an antelope actively trash-talking a lion through interpretive dance, and it works. Speaking of terrible decisions on the predator side of things, let's talk about the single detail that determines whether prey animals bother running at all: where the predator is looking. Here's something wildlife documentaries almost never spend time on. Many prey species are constantly monitoring not just where a predator is, but where its eyes are pointed.
Numerous studies on lizards, birds, and even some mammals show that flight initiation distance, the exact moment an animal decides to bolt, changes dramatically based on whether the approaching predator or human is looking directly at them versus looking away. A predator's gaze is one of the most reliable predictors of imminent attack in nature because you generally can't successfully ambush something you're not looking at. This is why deer in high-traffic parks will let joggers pass within a few feet without flinching, so long as the jogger's head stays forward, but bolt the instant that same jogger turns and makes eye contact. The deer isn't reacting to distance, it's reacting to attention. Predatory cats exploit the inverse of this constantly, approaching prey using peripheral vision, head angled away, gaze fixed anywhere but the target, right up until the final pounce. It is essentially the natural world's version of not looking at your phone while you sneak up on the last slice of pizza so nobody notices you coming. Myth 2. True or false? Myth. Prey animals bolt the instant they detect a predator nearby, distance being the only thing that matters. Reality. False. Distance matters, but attention state. Is the predator looking at me? Is it in hunting posture? Is it moving with purposeful direction versus wandering? Often matters more. Why it's false? Fleeing constantly for every nearby predator, regardless of behavior, would be catastrophically expensive. Many predators spend the overwhelming majority of their time not hunting, resting, traveling, ignoring prey entirely. An animal that treated every predator sighting as an attack would starve from non-stop, unnecessary sprinting. So, prey evolved to read behavioral cues: gaze, posture, gait, not just presence. This is precisely the skill I did not have in that raccoon incident. I saw shape, I did not check is shape actually hunting me, and my cardiovascular system paid the entrance fee for that oversight. Here's where nature gets weird in an entirely different direction, because sometimes the threat detector isn't the eyes or the ears at all. Sometimes it's smell, and sometimes it's smell from an animal that is already dead. When the skin of a minnow or a zebrafish is damaged, say by a predator's bite, specialized cells release a substance researchers call Schreckstoff, German for scare substance. Nearby fish detect it in the water and immediately shift into defensive behavior, schooling tighter, diving for cover, freezing in place, without ever seeing the predator that caused the injury. Think about what that means. A fish can receive a threat warning from a chemical signature left behind by an attack it didn't witness, released by a fish it may not have even known. It's a distress signal broadcast posthumously, essentially a biological voicemail that says, whatever got me might still be around. And it isn't limited to fish. Rodent studies have found that mice and rats show strong, apparently innate fear responses to a compound called TMT, found in fox feces, even in lab mice that have never encountered a fox or any predator in their entire indoor, air-conditioned lives. This is less learned behavior and more a genetic warning label baked in over millions of years, the biological equivalent of your phone auto-blocking a number before you've even picked up. Scenario drop 2.
You're a minnow in a shallow stream, no predator in sight, no splash, no shadow, no movement, but the water carries the faintest chemical trace of a relative's skin cells ruptured somewhere nearby minutes ago. You didn't see it happen, you will never know exactly what happened, and yet every fish around you tightens formation and drops toward the substrate because the water itself just testified to a crime scene. You are reacting to a threat that already finished happening, purely because the chemistry of fear doesn't evaporate as fast as the moment does. Which brings us to a species that takes threat recognition somewhere genuinely uncanny, not just recognizing danger, but you specifically as a category of danger or not. Elephants in Amboseli National Park in Kenya share their landscape with both the Maasai, who have historically speared elephants in conflicts over livestock and grazing land, and the Kamba, an agricultural community that poses comparatively little direct threat to elephants. Researcher Karen McComb and colleagues played recordings of human voices speaking a simple, neutral phrase in the Maasai language versus the Kamba language, and elephants reacted with significantly more fear and defensive bunching behavior to Maasai voices, even controlling for gender and age of the speaker. They didn't just detect a human, they detected which kind of human, from voice alone, and adjusted their entire evening plan based on that alone. That's the level of granular social threat assessment we're talking about in an animal with no written language and no formal linguistics training, just several decades of paying very close attention. Myth 3, true or false?
Myth: wild animals treat all humans as an equal generic threat, since we're the apex predator on the planet regardless of context. Reality: false. And elephants aren't the only example. Many species that have prolonged contact with humans, including deer, crows, and primates, show measurably different responses depending on human behavior, clothing, vehicle type, or even specific individuals. Why it's false? Treating every human identically would be enormously inefficient, given that human behavior toward wildlife varies wildly by group, context, and history. Animals that can distinguish actually dangerous human from human who's just walking to their car conserve enormous amounts of energy and stress. This is a skill I, personally, never developed for raccoons. But before we get there, sometimes evolution's fear detection software gets uninstalled entirely, and that tells us just as much as when it's running. Here's an unexpected exception worth sitting with. On islands without mammalian predators, the Galapagos being the most famous example, many native species show remarkably little fear of large approaching animals, including humans. Marine iguanas will let you stand within a few feet. Certain finches will nearly land on you. This isn't bravery, it's called island tameness, and it happens because fear responses towards specific threats are, to a significant degree, shaped by generations of exposure to those threats. Remove the threat from the environment for long enough, across enough generations, and the costly, energy-draining fear response toward it gradually fades, because animals that waste energy fearing something that never materializes are outcompeted by ones that don't. This is also exactly why island species are so catastrophically vulnerable when humans introduce new predators, rats, cats, pigs, because the local wildlife has no evolved reference point for that shape is dangerous. They haven't forgotten fear in general, they've simply never been issued the specific alarm call for this particular villain, the way a small-town resident might have no instinctive reaction to a specific big city scam that's obvious to everyone else. Unexpected Exceptions Part 2. This cuts both ways. Species reintroduced to predator-free zones for conservation purposes sometimes show fear responses toward predators they've genuinely never encountered, because that particular fear, unlike learned threat discrimination, appears to be more hardwired, similar to those TMT-fearing lab mice. So the picture isn't all fear is learned or all fear is innate. It's a messy, evolving mixture, species by species, threat by threat, and biologists are still mapping the boundaries. It's known that innate predator odor responses exist in rodents. It's known that learned social threat discrimination exists in elephants. Whether a given fear response in a given species is one, the other, or some blend is very often still an open, actively studied question. Speaking of open questions, let's talk about a bird with an apparently excellent memory and a genuinely concerning grudge-holding capacity. Researcher John Marsluff, working with American crows in Seattle, wore a distinctive rubber mask while trapping and briefly harmlessly banding wild crows.
Afterward, crows in the area reacted with alarm calls and mobbing behavior specifically toward that mask, not toward other masks, not toward the researchers' normal faces, for years afterward. Crows that hadn't even been present for the original trapping learned to recognize and react to the dangerous mask too, apparently through social learning from other crows. This means crows aren't just discriminating threats individually, they're building a shared communicated blacklist and updating it socially, the way a group chat warns everyone about the same bad rideshare driver. A single bad interaction with one crow can apparently generate a multi-year community-wide threat alert about a specific human face, which is either deeply impressive or deeply concerning, depending on how many rubber masks you own. Fast Fact 3. Some of Marslove's tracked crows maintained this recognition and alarm response for over a decade after the original encounter. Somewhere in Seattle, there is a crow older than some people's marriages who still remembers that one guy's face, and it is not letting it go. Myth 4. True or false? Myth: birds have famously short memories. Bird brain as an insult exists for a reason. False, dramatically false, at least for corvids, crows, ravens, magpies, and jays. These birds show facial recognition, social transmission of threat information, and long-term memory retention that rivals or exceeds many mammals. Bird brain as an insult should, scientifically speaking, be retired or at minimum reserved exclusively for pigeons who fly directly into windows they've flown into 4 times already. Why it's false? The insult predates our understanding of corvid cognition by roughly a century. It's less an accurate description and more a wildlife equivalent of a rumor that started before anyone checked the facts and just never got corrected, much like people still assuming bulls hate red when it's actually the movement of the cape, not the color, that provokes them. Here's where all of this comes together, because every one of these systems, alarm calls, gaze tracking, chemical cues, facial memory, voice discrimination for elephants, and facial memory for crows, exist for one brutal, unifying economic reason. Every false alarm costs something. Every ignored real threat can cost everything. Nature is running a constant cost-benefit calculation across every species we've talked about, and the specific tools each one developed, smell for fish, thermal signaling for squirrels, gaze tracking for deer, voice discrimination for elephants, and facial memory for crows, are all different solutions to the exact same underlying math problem. How do you stay alive without wasting your entire life being afraid? This is less master strategist and more evolution running millions of overlapping trial and error experiments simultaneously, keeping whatever barely worked and discarding whatever got its owner eaten. It is not elegant from the inside, it is spectacularly elegant from the outside, several thousand years later, viewed by a mildly sarcastic dead guy with nothing but time on his hands.
I had none of these systems properly calibrated. I had one blunt setting and a raccoon broke it permanently. You presumably have a slightly more functional threat detection system than I did, and here's the good news. You can actually calibrate it further, on purpose, starting right now. 1. Most wildlife encounters are not attacks in progress. Check behavior. Is the animal watching you, moving toward you with purpose, or just existing nearby before your nervous system commits to full panic? Gaze and posture tell you more than distance alone. 2. A single alarm call, bark, or warning sign is data, not a verdict. Real threat assessment in nearly every species we've covered involves cross-referencing multiple signals before committing to a response. Don't be the guy who had a coronary event over a raccoon. Be better than the guy who had a coronary event over a raccoon. 3. If you spend real time around a specific wild population, crows in your neighborhood, deer in a local park, know that individual recognition is very real in some species. How you behave the first time may follow you for years. Don't be the mask. 4. Predators generally aren't hunting you every time you see one. Most predator time is spent resting, traveling, or ignoring prey entirely. Persistent low-level panic around ordinary wildlife sightings is, evolutionarily speaking, a worse strategy than measured caution. 5. fear that's inherited genetically, like a rodent scent against fox scent, and fear that's learned socially, like an elephant's reaction to a specific human voice, look similar from the outside, but come from completely different places. Understanding which is which helps explain why some animals seem naturally calm around humans and others don't. It's rarely random. 6. Chemical, vocal, and visual warning signals in nature are often honest, a stotting gazelle, a heated squirrel tail, genuinely communicating real information, not bluffing. Learn to read the signal instead of dismissing the animal as simply erratic or dramatic. And maybe the big one, the goal was never to eliminate fear entirely. Every species we talked about tonight still gets afraid, appropriately, efficiently, and only when the actual math supports it. The goal is calibration, not elimination. Fear isn't the enemy. Miscalibrated fear is the enemy. Ask my heart. Actually, don't. It's unavailable for comment. So, for what it's worth, from someone who ran the numbers wrong exactly once at the worst possible moment, the natural world isn't full of monsters waiting to get you. It's full of extraordinarily specific, extraordinarily well-calibrated systems, refined over millions of years, mostly just trying to figure out the exact same thing you are. What's actually dangerous, and what's just a fat, unbothered raccoon having dinner in the bushes. I've got eternity to keep watching. You've got considerably less time, so I'd recommend using it more precisely than I used mine. This has been a dead guy several thousand animal encounters into an afterlife he did not ask for, telling you the truth nature already knew before either of us showed up. If you want more videos like this, subscribe.